And good day and welcome to the latest edition of Captains of Industry. My name is Tanya Habimana. And the question I have is, what connects the banking sector, fast-moving consumer goods sector, manufacturing and telecoms with an engineer who's also a chartered accountant? Dr. Segun Ogunsanya, Group CEO and MD of Airtel Africa, is the connection point and person I'm going to be speaking to over the next 30 minutes. Headquartered in Dubai, Airtel Africa is Africa's fourth largest telecommunications company and provides mobile money services to 14 countries across the continent. Dr. Ogunsanya is joining me today from Dubai. Welcome, Dr. Segun. So I'm so pleased and excited to talk to you, but I want to start off with the present. As Group CEO and MD of Airtel Africa, what does your average day look like?
So normal day for every CEO. I wake up quite early, 6 a.m. I'm up, do my gym, short time for breakfast, then I'm in the office, start my day around 8:30, finishes my day around 7, go back home, dinner, TV, spend some time with the family. I love a balanced life, so I do spend time with my family almost, at least whenever I'm not traveling, I do spend evening time with my family. Then do some emails, watch some TV, then ready for bed. Pretty routine day for me. In between, I do have a lot of meetings, many meetings in between. But overall, it's been a very fulfilling experience for me.
I can only imagine that there's many meetings in between. And I can also imagine that the journey to getting to where you are wasn't necessarily an easy one or a common one. I mean, just as I said in the introduction, a chartered accountant and an engineer. What would you say were the key moments that prepared you in your early career for the role that you now hold? Perhaps you could share two of those moments with us?
I think I've always wanted to be a business person. I decided to read engineering because in secondary school I was quite good in maths and very good in physics and other engineering-related subjects. So decided to go for engineering first to just learn the basics. Then after I did engineering, I worked for one of the very top accounting firms in Nigeria called Arthur Andersen & Co. in those days. And that was where I learned my business skills. And that was when I knew that I wanted to be a business person. But my engineering background provided a very solid base for me to appreciate numbers, to appreciate figures. And after I qualified as a chartered accountant, combining both my engineering background, accounting flair for business, flair for analysis, just prepare me for future challenges. So it's been a good foundation for me. If I'm to do it, I'll do it all over again. Be an engineer, chartered accountant as well. Just a good combination.
And so what's been the hardest challenge for you? I mean, like I said, I can't imagine that it was a smooth sailing journey. What was the moment where you really thought, wow, this is hard?
It's about leading people, Early in my career, I was opportune to be an expert. I left Nigeria when I was in my late 20s. I think I was 31, 32. And I became a CEO at a very young age. I was 33 when I got my first CEO assignment. And since 33, the only job I've done is CEO. So you can imagine what I've been through becoming a CEO at a relatively young age of 33. Not of a small company, of a major company. I was CEO of a Coca-Cola bottling company in Ghana, one of the largest companies in Ghana in those days. So having to deal with different people, different age brackets, different nationalities at such a very early age challenged me my very first few years as managing director. But what kept me going was some wisdom I received when I was made the CEO of Coca-Cola in Nigeria. My former boss called me into a room and he said to me, "Sir Segun, from these days, stop thinking as an accountant, start thinking like a businessman. Let the figures be dealt with by somebody else. You just focus on how to grow value. Make sure that you don't lose a sense of the figures by entrusting your figures to a very capable finance director, but you focus on expanding business, on growing value." And that was the first lesson I learned. That sometimes you can be pulled in different directions. The figures are the figures, but you must have a very big picture in order to create value for the stakeholders. So that was my first challenge. How to move from being an accountant, looking at figures, looking at Excel, to looking at a very, very big picture of how to deliver value for various stakeholders. And the stakeholders have competing interests, by the way. Your shareholders have particular interests. Your employees require some interest. and also the government. So managing the different stakeholders was quite a big challenge for me early in my career. But fortunately, I have a moral compass, and I just use that compass to determine what is good all of the time. And that was what kept me going in the early days of being a managing director at a relatively young age.
Now, I'm glad that you shared about the wisdom that was shared with you, because what we've seen on this show is that a lot of senior leaders and business minds tend to have almost like a circle of influence, an internal board of directors, if I may say so. Who's been in your circle? Who has guided you along the way?
I've been blessed by having a very good board, very diverse board in every area I've worked. And that shaped my international perspective. I tend not to look at things in very localized manner, but very broad perspective with various interests of different stakeholders. Few people have helped me. One person that I really admire is one of the top businessmen in Nigeria, Aliko Dangote. I've learned from his wisdom, very audacious. Nothing is too big for Aliko to do. It's greatly inspired me not to really think so much about small things, but think big, aim for the sky. And if you don't get to the sky, you're going to get very close to the sky. So I can say Aliko Dangote has been one of the major influences on me in terms of his going for big things and breaking barriers to realizing his objectives. It's worked for me so well as well.
And one thing that I find quite interesting with your journey, you spent close to, well, over 15 years at Coca-Cola, close to 10 years at Airtel. And when you look at the current climate, the current economy, the average millennial spends 2.75 years at a single company. How do you reconcile that as a leader? How do you view the current employment trends?
I've always been a long-term person, and I tend to stay to make maximum impact. When I talk to young leaders, I also say to them, you must know when to leave. There's a time to stay, there's a time to leave. But the time to leave is not when you've not created impact. And an average CEO requires at least 3 years for you to create maximum impact anyway. The first year you spend understanding what the challenges are, knowing the people, and by the second year, that's when you start making impact. And for those impact to be sustainable, you need another 1 or 2 years to create sustainable impact. So for me, it's about just staying long enough to make sure the changes you've made, they're entrenched, they're long-lasting, and also grooming successors. That's one thing I also value. If you stay too short in a place, you're unable to grow good succession. And if you stay too long as well, too, you probably become blind to some of the opportunities. So you must find a sweet spot between not staying too short and not overstaying your welcome in a place, so that you can create leaders to do other things for you. Although I spent a long time in Coca-Cola, I actually spent almost 17 years working for Coca-Cola in different countries. I was in Ghana as the MD for Coca-Cola Bottling Company. I spent a short time in Kenya. I spent a short time in Nigeria as well, managing the second largest operation for Coca-Cola in Africa. And all through, I've loved the impact we've created, because sometimes, creating value doesn't mean that you shouldn't think about your various communities where you operate. I've got a flair for creating value for stakeholders and for making sure the communities are not left behind. And that's what I've enjoyed working for companies that touch so many people. Coca-Cola, it touched so many people, so many distributors, so many mom and pop shops who derive their livelihood from selling Coca-Cola. Same thing with telco. You touch so many people selling, airtime cards, selling data bundles, and creating value, creating digital inclusion, creating financial inclusion. It's always be a blessing when I'm creating value for my shareholders and at the same time touching the lives of people in the various communities where we operate.
Now, one thing that you were blessed with in your career is the ability to work in several countries that you've just mentioned: Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, across the continent. Now, that has also been put to the front as a result of COVID, actually, where people could all of a sudden see that they could operate from anywhere in the world. How do you tackle that, and in terms of employee mobility and when you're leading your team?
Nothing can replace physical human connection. I must say that from the onset. But what COVID taught us is there are so many things you can do without having physical contact with people. And that created a new ball game for CEOs, for employees, for governments, for various stakeholders to interact. But I still believe that you need that physical interaction. I visit as many countries as I can. I'm responsible for 14 countries in Africa, from East Africa to Central Africa to West Africa, French speaking, English speaking. I do visit them as often as I can. And after having said that, technology is an enabler. It enables so many things to be done digitally. And during COVID, we actually prospered. And we also created opportunities for families to connect, for businesses to connect, for individuals to connect. So it's got to be a mix of that, not losing that human connection, and at the same time leveraging what technology offers to create efficiencies and to make it easier for you to touch different places in a very short time. So a combination of the two is required for sustainability. One, physical connectivity, two, digital connectivity, and bringing both together is going to be a winning formula for CEOs, for employees, and for communities.
Now, I have to ask you, you recently moved the Airtel headquarters to Dubai. What were the underlying reasons behind this move, and how do you see it playing forward in the long term?
But we operate in 14 countries, like I said earlier. It's probably easier for me to travel to most of the countries from Dubai. We're listed in the UK, meaning we have shareholders in UK. It's also easier for me to travel to UK where I talk to investors. We also have investors from the US, and we have promoters from India. So Dubai is more like a central place. Makes it easier for me to reach all our stakeholders, customers in Africa, shareholders in London, US, and India, and also relate with the London Stock Exchange, where we are principally or primarily listed.
It's still quite well, I want to phrase this in a positive way, but it is a bit of a shame that the easiest way to travel across the continent for us is to actually be outside. But hopefully some leaders will emerge in that sector as well. But moving on, I want to hear about some of your board appointments. I mean, it's quite diverse, literally ranging from micro, small and medium enterprise policy for the government of Nigeria, all the way through to boards within private sector companies. How do you navigate this? How do you see your role as a board member, and when do you see that as being a strategic move for you in your career?
Like I said earlier, creating value for stakeholders, for shareholders, you must also create value for your communities. Some of those boards that I serve on, they are not profit-oriented. I serve on the board of a school, one of the best in Nigeria. I just have the obligation. I think if you're very successful, or if you're really successful, you have an obligation to create more leaders. So in every board I sit on, I make sure I'm able to add value by creating leaders, supporting the CEOs, supporting the management to unleash the talent that is available in Africa. I used to sit on a board in Ghana. All we did was to make it easier for doctors when they qualify from medical school to stay back in Ghana to support Ghana. That was something massive. By just being on this board, by bringing a lot of stakeholders in the private sector, we created opportunities for doctors who were living in droves to Europe to stay back in Ghana and create better access to medical care for those who live in Ghana. Those are the kind of boards I love to sit on, where we're not only creating financial prosperity for the stakeholders, we're also creating prosperity for the communities where those companies are situated.
Absolutely. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is there's creating value for your stakeholders, for your shareholders, your board, but also creating value in terms of building up the next generation and leading. I'm quite curious to understand what your hiring philosophy is. How do you go about creating a team?
My primary responsibility is to look for people who have the right flair for learning. Because I believe knowledge is perishable. And if you're not able to learn, you're not going to create an impact. So one thing I look for in people when I'm hiring, whether junior leaders or senior leaders, like, is this person capable of learning? Can the person unlearn what they knew to just create more opportunity for learning something new? So if you're not able to learn, then you don't stand a chance with me. Because I believe that you must continuously learn in order to improve yourself and to improve the community, to improve the company you're working for. So if you have, arrogance, if you're too much into yourself, you reckon you know it all, you're unable to learn something new, then you don't even cross the gate. If I see a hunger to learn, desperation to learn new things in you, you stand a good chance of working long term with me personally.
And how do you spot that? What are the clues to seeing a person who's able to learn? Because I mean, it feels to me like everybody says, I'm a quick learner, I love learning, I want to grow. But when it comes to actually the ability to absorb information, the hunger that you're talking about, how do you identify that?
You know when somebody is desperate for knowledge, and you know when somebody is satisfied with the status quo, it oozes out from the way you talk, you're satisfied with your status quo, you keep talking about what you've done, you don't talk about what you've missed out. Because if somebody keeps talking about successes without talking about failures, about learnings is taken, then that person's capacity to learn is diminished. So I really search for what you've done that didn't pan out the way you thought it was going to pan out, and what you've learned from such, and whether you're willing to do things differently all over again. Those are signals. When you have a guy or a woman in front of you and he keeps talking about what is done so well, and there are no learnings, there are no mistakes, then that person is probably not tested the frontiers of learning.
Yeah, that's quite clear. Quite a good example there. Now, on the topic of learning, I'd like to learn some more and get your thoughts on trends within the telecom sector. How do you view it? I mean, especially as we're coming out of a COVID-19 pandemic, which has accelerated the development of technology, of which the telecom sector is part of. How do you view the next years coming forward?
It's been strange what COVID taught us. Because either people thought telcos were going out of fashion and that we're going to become dumb pipes for other people to ride on. But what if we become now is an enabler for different sectors of the industry. We enable communication, we enable transportation, we enable education. People are learning digitally now. We're working with UNICEF on digital education in some parts of Africa. We enable medical care. People in rural areas, they're actually able to have access to the best medical care in the world by digital connection. So I think the frontiers are limitless. What we can do, how we can create a digital world and use telecommunications to enable so many things to thrive. So I see our role as the horizontal upon which every other industry stays on. Whether you're talking about education sector, you're talking about health sector, you're talking about entertainment sector, with the horizontal that would propel every other sector of the economy to thrive. And that's the beauty of what we're doing, being at the center of it all, being able to create that pipe, not a dumb pipe, a pipe that people can use, either to push the frontiers of education, to push the frontiers of medical care, or to put the frontiers of entertainment. In Africa, we have, so many young men and women whose only access to the internet is through a mobile device. I call them mobile first or mobile only generation. The only access they have to reach the world is through a mobile device because we've got limited fixed line connectivity. So what we do every day creates inflation, creates prosperity, enables all of us to become one united community. And that's the beauty of telecommunication. You can see that in Joburg, you can see that in Soweto, you can see that in Lagos, you can see that in Malawi, and understand what is being taught in the US, what's being taught in Europe, what's being taught in Nairobi. That's what we do. We make the world a smaller place, easy to reach through the power of a mobile device.
Now, speaking of this mobile first or mobile only generation, this is also a generation that is increasingly mobile in terms of travels and also in terms of placing their residences and working. A generation that, studies in Ghana and then goes to work in Kenya. Now, that generation, and when we're looking at the whole mobile sector, I can imagine as a generation that would benefit from a consolidated telecoms industry. When we look at markets like Europe, a few years ago, Europe had I don't know if this is the correct term, but a free roaming agenda whereby roaming fees were eliminated throughout the European Union. How close are we to seeing this on the continent, and especially given agreements such as the AFCFTA?
I think it requires so many stakeholders to make this work. The governments of the various countries in Africa, my industry, the telcos. Because otherwise, if you've got barriers created by some countries that make it difficult for a customer from Kenya to roam in South Africa because of tariffs imposed on incoming calls. That's the challenge we have. It's not so much the restriction are created by telcos. It's about various tariffs being created in various countries that make it difficult for uniform tariff or for customers to be able to roam freely. So it's going to take a lot of negotiations between the various governments and industry to create this one Africa, one West Africa, one Central Africa, whereby people can move between Africa without worrying about a big shock. Where we are now, because I don't see a lot of resolve, a lot of motivation on the part of the various regulatory authorities to create this one Africa that is good for us as telcos, good for very many customers, and ultimately it's going to create more value, more connectivity between Africans. That's what we need to work on with the critical stakeholders to create a one Africa philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as a consumer, this is something I'm very much looking forward to. Not having to, I have a phone case, and inside this phone case, there's about 7 or 8 SIM cards for the various countries that I often travel to. And I'm looking forward to not having to do that. But moving forward and speaking to
So what you do,
yeah?
just take an Airtel SIM card. You don't have to have 2 SIM cards if you go to any of our 14 countries. Tariffs are very friendly. So we've created one Airtel, whereby if you move from any of our countries, you don't require a second SIM card.
Oh, brilliant. I'll look into that. But moving forward and speaking to the countries in which you operate, 14 currently, what are the plans for expansion to the rest of the continent?
If you look at the 14 countries where we operate, we still have plenty of room for growth. The runway is still very, very long. If I take a country like DRC, one of the largest in Africa, we probably covered about 60% of the population. So another 40% still uncovered. Even Nigeria, which is the largest hubco, we've covered like 80% of the population, 20% remain uncovered. Go to Tanzania, we've done about 75%. So you can see plenty of room for growth in the countries. So what we're focusing on is growing our franchise in each of those countries. Of course, if there's an opportunity that presents itself, we're going to look at it. But for now, my focus and the focus of my team is to deepen our operations in each of those 14 countries and make sure we either number 1 or number 2, preferably to be number 1, by the way, most of the countries. That's my ambition. And that's what we're going to double down on, create value in each of those 14 countries, and eventually become number 1 in most of them.
Do you see room for further consolidation in the industry?
If you look at Africa, we've got about 3-4 major telcos in Africa. In most of the major markets, we've got about 3 operators. Only the first 2 are very, very viable. If you're number 3, you're not viable. So I reckon over time, there may be some consolidation. We've got only 3 or 4. In countries where you have more than 4, number 3, number 4, they're not as viable as number 1, as number 2. So I believe economics will actually force consolidation. And I would say this is not very, very far away.
Okay. Okay. Now I want to know a little bit more about Dr. Segun as a person. And what advice would you give to a young Segun?
The main advice is to I call it finding the right phrase to just put it now. To be constructively discontent. And it's a very strange phrase. You have to be constructively hungry for knowledge, for success. That's my number 1 advice. How do you create this hunger in you? Is by wanting to do more, wanting to create impact, and by just wanting to do more than is required of you. I've spoken to so many leaders who reckon that, once they've done what is required, then they're good. No, you must do more than what is required for you to be very successful. So my first advice is to be constructively hungry. Just have that hunger in you. Hunger to succeed, hunger to learn more, hunger to make an impact, hunger to just create something from nothing. That's my number 1 advice to people. That hunger must be there. If you're not hungry, then it becomes a lot more difficult for you to create an impact. That hunger must be continuous. You must continuously feel that passion inside you to do something different, to move from A to B, not to be satisfied with being at A because A seems to be the limit for you. My advice is just create this hunger in you that makes you hungry every time for success.
And in one sentence, what is the hope that you have for the next generation of leaders on the African continent?
I think the next generation of leaders will probably do more than we've done. I see them more focused on creating change. I see them wanting to create success with a purpose. Years ago, people joined a company because of salary, because of perks. Now, the young ones are joining a company because of purpose, what impact are they going to be able to make? So my advice to young is to make sure that whatever you're doing, there's a bigger purpose. And that purpose is not only financial returns, purpose is to make a change. I just love when people make impact. I've seen so many unicorns come out of Africa, 3 or 4 from Nigeria, from Kenya, from South Africa. So it's very important to just have a purpose that goes beyond financial returns, a purpose to create a change, purpose to make people more successful, purpose to lift people out of poverty. So don't focus only on financial returns, focus on the big picture of creating impact. And of course, you need financial security to create impact anyway, that would come. But if your focus is strictly on financial reward, you're going to miss the point, because we have an obligation to lift Africa out of poverty. We can only do it by having this big purpose of creating impact beyond financial rewards.
Thank you so much. Impact, purpose, and a hunger for learning. That's really what I'm gathering from this conversation, which was very insightful. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was Dr. Segun Ogunsanya, Group CEO and MD of Airtel Africa, joining us for this episode of Captains of Industry. Thank you for watching. My name is Tanya Habimana, and until next time.